Welcome back to another live recording of Fatherhood Friday here on the Military Veteran Dad Podcast. I'll give a few minutes for anybody that wants to pop on while I record this live episode. For anybody that doesn't know what this is essentially the Fatherhood Friday episode that I release in the podcast Military Veteran Dad that comes up on Friday mornings. And this episode is either something on my heart, it's something that I'm focusing on. Sometimes it's a lesson I learned weeks ago and I just wrote it down, and it's sometime this feels like the right time to talk about it. So Fatherhood Friday is something that I've really used over the past almost now 8-9 months to really step into my voice, find different stories, massage different stories, take random things that are happening during the day and try to do something with them. It's a very safe place to experiment with a lot of things. So if you have a podcast out there or any type of platform, this Fatherhood Friday has been something that I look forward to every single week. It's been something that I grow with every single time that I hit publish. And now by publishing them on Facebook at the same time, I'm double whamming it because I'm creating content for Facebook, but then I'm also getting good at doing a Facebook Live and learning all the different things that go into a quality Facebook Live. I'm not sure where you guys think this Facebook Live is right now, but right now I would say I'm slightly above mediocre. I've had a few of the bumps in the beginning. I've had some upgrading with my equipment. I'm getting better technology. I feel like I still need to work on the background around here a little bit. Getting the logo added, that was something that was interesting enough to get hard, but it's there, so I learned how to do that. All these different things are things that you get to experiment with, especially when you're a smaller podcast like the Military Veteran Dad is, that it's often you can get so caught up in just doing different things that you forget that just trying new things when you're small is awesome experience, because then you get to try it before you've got 30,000 people or 1 million listeners listening. You practice when you were small, and that allows you to get better when you're bigger. So guys, I'm going to go ahead and start this week's episode of Fatherhood Friday. Welcome back to another episode of Fatherhood Friday. Guys, it is September here in Wisconsin. The weather's starting to change. We've had an entire week of just gray skies and rain. It's definitely one of those weeks that you're like, this is definitely a vitamin D shortage kind of week here. But it's been a great week. I've spent a lot of time with my youngest daughter, who's in afternoon preschool. We've had some great mornings in the morning. Today's Thursday, so I had a field day in the house. So that's something that as a stay-at-home dad, I've incorporated my military field day into the household field day. And so that's the time that I go around and clean, you name it. Gets cleaned. Working on trying to get more stuff clean. Right now, I can only get about the upstairs done. But every week, I get a little bit better, and I incorporate more things into my week. But overall, this week was a really great week, finding my rhythm, finding my stride as a stay-at-home dad, being able to balance everything, the groceries, the dinner, the cleaning, podcasts, trying to grow the business, all of these things. Being a dad, being a husband, these things don't stop. And every day, I get a better chance, and I get a different chance to try to redo it or come up with a better way to think about it. And that kind of leads me into this week's topic. This week's topic kind of just hit me randomly throughout the week as I don't really know how I got thinking about it, but it really was just kind of like rewinding through my timeline at some of the key pivotal moments of what just happened in different parts of my life. And I was thinking about one in particular when I first got out of the Marine Corps. One of the most common things that you do in the Marine Corps is you get all your different stuff for the GI Bill, and you think, I'm going to get my college education on the other side. Well, that was me as well. I'd done some college classes in the Marine Corps. I was starting to build that foundation, and I applied to a lot of different colleges in Wisconsin. I applied to UW-Madison and immediately got rejected because I applied for, I think, the College of Engineering at that time because I was a generator mechanic, so it seemed to make sense at the time. I applied at UW-Whitewater, which is a smaller four-year college nearby where I am, and ultimately ended up going to UW-Whitewater after that rejection from UW-Madison. And I had a few friends in my life that had different ideas how to get into UW-Madison, even though despite the rejection. And I took a left turn and just went the easy road. And I never really thought of much about it at the time because I probably wasn't really aware of a lot of the emotions that were governing a lot of my subconscious at the time. But to be honest, as I reflected back, I was running. I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure I applied to UW-Madison when I was still in Okinawa. So I still had 2,000 miles in between the island and the campus. So the realness of probably the decision was also a little bit different. But that moment really kind of, as I was reflecting back, I was like, I wonder where my life would have been had I went to a Big Ten school like UW-Madison, where would I have been with the network of friends? One thing I've often been jealous of people that go to a 4-year college or have that under their belt is they always seem to have this network of friends that continue on after life. And I never really had that. If you know my story from following the podcast, you know friendships was something that really was at the core of my origin story. And it didn't hit me till I was 30. And this story is beginning about 26, 27 when I got out of the Marine Corps. Or actually probably a little bit earlier than that, when I was 24. But ultimately, like that decision, I was just kind of rethinking. I was like, man, I kind of really regret not just going for it, because now I'm kind of ballsy. I just do it. I try to starve the fear. I recognize the fear and be like, just go for it. And ultimately, I was like, well, why didn't I do it? Where would my life have been? There was just a big pile of regret sitting next to that decision. And for me, it was one of those things that I was thinking, like, I think this is a podcast episode because so many decisions, if we relate that to dad, how many times as a dad do you regret a decision? Daily. If you're like me, it's daily, whether it be I really shouldn't have disciplined that way. Well, that discipline method really backfired, or I'm never doing that type of outing with the kids again. They're all different types of guilt, but a lot of that guilt comes back to you just feel you don't feel enough. And in those moments, you feel like you should have known better. You wish you could have gone back. And what we don't pause, I think, is what I was realizing this week, is I don't think I truly went back and kind of dealt with that guilt. I think I just kind of suppressed it and kept moving on and running and going faster. But ultimately, if you've been listening to the podcast, the advice that I often talk about is you need to face your fears. You need to run towards your emotions. Your emotions are meant to be felt and understood. But that one for UW-Madison, I honestly didn't really process it all. I mean, it would have been a completely new direction, because had I got accepted to UW-Madison, I would have been a full-time student. I wouldn't have tried to get a job. I wouldn't have tried to get a job and juggle trying to go to UW-Whitewater at the same time, which didn't end up working out very well. I only stayed there about a year, and then I transferred to a small 2-year college. And ultimately ended up burning out and dropping out of the College of Engineering that I was registered at eventually. So, like, what would have happened? Like, all of that what ifs. And I probably spent, probably an hour thinking about this in my head. And I was thinking, now looking back, I'm like, well, that was dumb. I just spent an hour of my time thinking about something that has absolutely no ability to change. And through all of that, I was just like, how could I have handled that better? And I don't think I've even really thought about guilt a lot on the podcast, or even in my own development. I don't think I've processed a lot of the things that I felt guilty over. There's so many different things in our life that happen, and we don't honor to feel that guilt. And I think what we often do as people and dads is when someone dies, it's natural. You almost have to, because that person, that physical connection is no longer there. But when it comes to guilt and grief, I think, are married in some of the same ways, because it's a loss of a future that never happened. It's maybe an opportunity or a job interview that never happened. And, well, you never got to meet it like a person. You still have to kind of grieve that loss. But then also making sure, if you just go through the idea of guilt, I was doing some research on this before starting the podcast, and ultimately, you just have to remember learning your mistakes. Like, if you do regret that and you do have guilt surrounding that, make sure you understand how to prevent it. That's something that I think a lot of dads don't do a lot of R&D, or after action review, to use a term from the military, because it's that guilt and just understanding, like, how could I have prevented it? In this case, with UW-Madison, it's having a complete awareness, whether I'm leading with fear or I'm leading with this makes sense and this is logical and this is what I want for my life. That wasn't something that I ever did. And it wasn't something I definitely didn't do back then, because looking back, I was running, for one. I was just on this path to catch up. I felt so behind in life, and I just felt like everybody else was ahead of me, which is one of the maybe the reasons why I picked UW-Madison. I didn't have any connection to it. I had no family members there. It was probably just one of those things that'd be cool if I could go to UW-Madison, being the Big Ten conference for Wisconsin. But ultimately, it was one of those that I just didn't process, and I ran from that decision, and here I am today with what I've got. But you have to also recognize that it all happened, that maybe had I done that, I probably would be in a different spot, but I didn't. I'm in this spot. And honestly, if I were to approach it from a different angle, I probably would have done really well at UW-Madison at that time if I maybe had slowed down, not gotten a job, just slowed down and focused on the school. I probably would have done really well. I wouldn't have been multitasking. I might not have been married at the time. My life and that angle of my family could be completely different. But at the same time, by going this route that I did, taking the path, the lower path, the easier one at the time, I ultimately took, looking back now, a harder path. While I, at the moment, thought it was the easier path, now, looking back, it was the harder path because I had to learn how to deal with failure after dropping out of the College of Engineering. I had my grass dry up on me for the 6 months of my life after dropping out. I'm like, what do I do next? Because my entire life was gambling on getting a college degree. That was going to be my grass was greener on the other side. All of that, all of those things, like that moment, dropping out, going through that pit, finding out what is my next grass is going to be greener, that created the person I am today. I wouldn't have gone to a seminar on making the transition from staff to supervisor. I would have never found my passion for leadership again from the Marine Corps. And I maybe found it in a different way and going through the different roundabout way. But the way that I did it, I had to really dig deep and I had to carve out a person that was going through the trenches. And I was recording a podcast episode this week with Morgan Snyder, the author of Becoming a King. And he really laid it blatantly right out there. And he's like, it takes a lot of shit on a field to make a good crop. And I could argue that if I would have gone to UW-Madison, it would have taken a lot more time to put the same amount of shit on my field to create the depth and the understanding and the fruits of my life that I have today. I'm going to be turning 36 on the 20th as of this month. And I have to believe that I probably would have been at a completely different stage. I probably would have had what most people would have considered perfect life, the house, the family. At some point, it would have been some version of something. But I wouldn't have had the emotional depth. I wouldn't have been able to understand what's governing my mind. I wouldn't have probably had the insights to help lead military veterans through their life. All of these things came from that big pile of guilt that I wonder what would happen. But at the same time, the life I have today is the one that I've got. And probably the cherry on top for guilt is really digging deep, whether it be journaling it, maybe doing a Facebook Live like this and just talking about it, whatever it may be. But the guilt can best be served when you find the gratitude in the guilt. So every time you look back and you're just like, well, that was a dumb move, you have to really think like, I learned something from that. I'm never doing that again. I was talking to another guy today on a podcast, and he was talking about when you have bad leadership in front of you, it's very difficult to try to motivate yourself to go through that pit because it just sucks sometimes when you have someone ahead of you that just doesn't get you or just doesn't understand how to lead people. But at the same time, it's teaching you a lot of, well, that's exactly who I am not. And oftentimes that's the same thing with guilt, is you learn through like trying to figure out, what did that teach me? What did that teach me in the moment to be able to move through it? And ultimately, if I wrap this whole podcast episode in a box, I want you to really challenge the things that you're guilty about. Because honestly, for me, this was holding me down a little bit, and I wasn't even consciously thinking about it. But subconsciously, it was there. If you've been following, you know that I've really struggled to find a solid reason to wake up in the morning since leaving my job in January. And I think it's some of these different guilt tripwires almost that I haven't really tripped off and dealt with and let them explode and deal with whatever feelings come up. Because, man, that guilt can be something that it's really like a ball and chain in a lot of cases. Because no matter how you lived your life, no matter what you did, that guilt can be something that just, you know what, like, I'm going to care. Especially, you can extrapolate it to worst case scenarios. Maybe if you were in a car accident and through no fault of your own in that car accident, someone died. And there was not a single thing you could do about it, but nevertheless, that event caused and took a life. You've got to deal and process that guilt. I mean, those are heavier situations. Or if we extrapolate even more to the military sense, maybe something happened in Iraq or Afghanistan and the guilt or the what ifs continue to plague you. You really have to keep working through these motions. Like for me, I'm continuing to dig into the guilt bucket because I think there's a lot here for me to unpack throughout the last 10 years of my life of different things that I could have did, different decisions, different times I sat in neutral. To be honest, like a lot of the times I was where I didn't have a job, I was just in neutral coasting. I wasn't pushing myself. I wasn't starving my fear. I was doing it, but I wasn't doing it in the way that felt right in my gut. And I think that's what caused a lot of the heartache on the other side of leaving my job. And so, again, dig deep and question what guilt tripwires are you not tripping? Because those tripwires, in this case, they're meant to go off and they need to go off, because if they don't go off, it's going to go off at some unexpected time in your life. And it's going to be probably a ball of either an explosion of emotion, of anger. It's going to be something that's uncontrollable. And so trip it in a controlled way. Understand, be like the bomb squad that goes in to self-detonate a bomb they know is a bomb, but they need to make it go away. And they self-detonate it under a controlled circumstance. Take those guilt things, whether it be finding a friend to talk to, finding a therapist to talk to, whatever it may be, whatever you need to get through this guilt that you're carrying as a father. And it can be in any category of life. But I want you to really think about that guilt, because it is holding you back. It is preventing you from coming home. And when you let go of that guilt, as I did just now with something simple of going to college or not, or choosing to go to a different college, that guilt is going to probably lead to a few more strings to some different thoughts of different things that are going on. And all of that is things that need to be processed. And for me, I didn't think about that thought about UW-Madison. I probably haven't considered that thought in 15 years. And all of a sudden this week it hit me and I'm like, you know what? I almost went to Madison. I wonder what would have happened if I did. And it's that little micro moment where I got insight. I'm like, I need to unpack this, because there was a lot there that I wasn't dealing with in that moment when I made that 15 years ago. But man, looking back, like there's so many different other scenarios where guilt plays a play. And it's something that I'm going to be myself unpacking more. And if I have any other ones come to fruition and they feel my heart feels like sharing it on the podcast, I'll definitely be doing a future Fatherhood Friday episode on it. But guys, just remember, this guilt isn't meant to be carried with you. It's meant to be let go. It's meant to be processed. It's meant to be understood. It's meant to teach you about what not to do in the future. There's nothing you can do about the past, and you can only live in the future. And there's something that I repeat for a lot of dads that lost a friend in Iraq or Afghanistan in battle, right next to them in many cases. And they get haunted with this question of, why did I live and the other person died? Like that kind of guilt. And there's a piece of advice that I've learned through the process of this podcast is that friend died so that you could go home and be the best fucking dad you could be. And when we hold on to that guilt and continue just to keep it close and keep all the people around us that love us further away, we're not honoring the service and the sacrifice that person gave us to live, to come home, hug our kids. Because if that guy was a father, he doesn't get to hug his kids and his kids don't get to hug him. And so just remember that this guilt isn't meant to be held on to. It's meant to be let go. It's meant to be understood. It's meant to be felt. And you need to in order to come home. This is the big topic. If this resonated and you don't have someone to reach out to and you need to, please reach out to me, ben@militaryveterandad.com. I'm an open book. I'm always a friend that I wish I had in my life when I turned 30. You'll never get an email that's not replied if you're a listener. So I appreciate you guys listening. And with that, I'm going to wrap up this episode. This one's a little bit longer, but I wanted to make sure I got this one because this one can be a really big landmine for many dads out there. So guys, have an awesome weekend. I hope something amazing comes of it. I'm not sure what's going to happen here. We've only got one sunny day, but we'll make the most of it here in Wisconsin. But guys, I will talk to you guys again on Monday, and thank you for listening. Thank you, Facebook, for checking in and listening to this episode of Fatherhood Friday. Go ahead and like and comment anything that you really liked in this. Maybe you want to share what you're holding on to. Maybe this episode of guilt really opened up something for you. Go ahead and share it in the comments. I'd love to engage in a conversation. Or if it's something private, feel free to drop me a message. I'm always on there. I'm always willing to reply. And guys, just remember, we were never meant to do life alone. And when life gives you more than you can handle, and maybe you're not even aware of it, and maybe this episode opened it up for you, please reach out. because for millennia, we did life in tribes, and it takes men to share the load to really move past this type of heavy stuff. I shared a very easy example, but there's a lot of heaviest stuff like losing a friend. And that stuff isn't something you can process on your own. So please reach out, find a friend, either myself or someone close to you. This stuff needs to let go. So with that, enjoy the rest of your week on Facebook, and thank you for listening.